Hello everyone, welcome to my channel on understanding finances and sports. Today's episode is going to be on event revenues and expenses. So when we talk about events, what events are we talking about? It's the major sporting events such as the Summer and the Winter Olympics, the Paralympics, the FIFA World Cup, big events like Wimbledon and the other Grand Slam events, the Rugby World Cup, the golf majors, World Championship boxing bouts, the Commonwealth Games, Swimming World Championships, the Cricket World Cup, etc. So it's really the really big events that we are talking about. So what are some of the major sources of revenues for such sporting events? Ticket sales, gate receipts, and sale of corporate hospitality boxes. These traditionally were the bread and butter for major sporting events, and today, while they are still a significant portion of the revenues generated, their percentage as a percentage of total revenues has been steadily decreasing over the years. And in the case of, let's say, FIFA, they now account for about 13% of FIFA's total revenues. The major revenue earner for most of these events are the sale of broadcast and media rights. Now, these rights are sold to TV channels like Fox and Sky, ESPN, and these broadcasters, they can buy the country rights, so they have the rights to broadcast that event in a particular country, or they can buy the regional rights for broadcast in, let's say, Africa or Europe, or they can be awarded the global rights, in which case they have the rights to beam this event on TV or on cable worldwide. Significant amount of monies are paid for these broadcast and media rights. And again, I'll take FIFA as an example. FIFA generates roughly 55% of its revenues from sale of broadcast and media rights. Then in addition to this, we are talking about sponsorships, and here corporates such as Coca-Cola, Pepsi, MasterCard, Nike, etc. They sponsor an event, and there are various sponsor categories. You can have the naming rights. For example, your event could be named after that particular company. You have the Barclays Premier League, for example, or you previously had the Vivo IPL. The sponsors can also, just like the broadcasters, buy the country rights, the regional rights, or the global rights. And in the case of FIFA, these generate roughly 31% of FIFA's revenues. Then what's becoming increasingly important these days is the sale of digital rights. And large tech firms such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube are now entering the sports arena and buying rights to be able to stream those matches onto their platforms. YouTube, for example, will live stream even the World Chess Championships these days. And they sell online sports products, and they also are playing a part in innovation of the sport and introducing such things as virtual reality. So your sale of digital rights, which is really part of the sale of media rights, is becoming more and more important, and therefore I've decided to show this separately. Okay, let's look at some of the major expenses for big sports events. Infrastructure. Obviously, you're putting on a major event somewhere, and therefore you're going to be expecting a lot of people to attend that event. Apart from the teams, you'll have journalists, you'll have fans, you'll have a whole host of people who will attend, and therefore you need to have a proper road network. Your airports need to be of a certain standard. You need to have hotels of a good quality standard for people to stay in. You have to have a process to grant people visas in a trouble-free manner, etc. So the infrastructure around the event obviously needs to all be upgraded, and maybe even new infrastructure built. Similarly, for the venues, the stadiums, obviously the matches are going to be played in stadiums of a world-class quality, and in some cases the country, the host, will actually build new venues and new stadiums. The team's preparation fee is normally paid by the event organizer, like for example FIFA. For the last World Cup, FIFA paid each participant $1.5 million to prepare for the event. TV production costs, very significant. Obviously, the event is going to be beamed all over the world, and therefore you need to have the TV feed and how that entire event is produced for TV. And this can either be done by the organizer themselves, or they can give this to the broadcaster to do as part of the broadcast agreement. The match costs and the operational costs, these are actually the costs incurred on the day of the match to get the place ready. This can include things like, a very simplistic example, cutting the grass for the football match to be played, or getting water bottles for the players, or making sure that the electricity is on, and making sure that the backup generators are in place, etc. The stadium lights, for example. Security and policing, very important. This has to be done inside and outside the stadium. Make sure that everything is properly controlled, and there's proper security to protect the players and the fans. Integrity, anti-corruption and anti-doping measures, these are normally put in place by most of the organizations these days to ensure that the event is clean and fair and free of corruption and doping. Costs related to the umpires and referees and other officials, these are people who will officiate the match, and they obviously have to be paid, and their expenses to do with their travel and accommodation. You may decide, the sponsors, whether it's FIFA or World Rugby, may decide to have an opening ceremony, in which case there will be costs for putting that ceremony on. Plus, if they want to fly in some major artists, then in that case those are fairly significant expenses. Trophies for the winning teams, prize money obviously for the teams as well. Fairly significant. Ticketing arrangements, the cost of this whole ticketing arrangement, the turnstiles, the barcoding, and of course the printing of the tickets and so on, are a fairly significant cost for something like a World Cup. Insurances and risk management, again very important. What happens if there's rain and matches are called off? People have bought tickets, so what safeguards are in place to protect the organization against financial risk? Sponsor servicing, as I've mentioned in the previous slide, people have paid a lot of money to be associated with this event, so there are obligations on both sides, in terms of a formal contract to complete their obligations. Media management. With the World Cup, there'll be thousands of journalists coming in and attending the event, and therefore the media have to be provided with all the facilities, the proper facilities, so that they can report back to their countries in a trouble-free manner. Internet facilities and so on, and televisions for them to watch the matches and be in a part of the stadium where they can actually see what's going on. Staffing and costs of the local organizing committee. So when there's a major event on, normally the World Rugby or FIFA will appoint people who will organize the event locally, and that's normally called the local organizing committee, and that is specifically set up to deal with all the event issues in the country. Accommodation costs for the teams, for the staff, for the administrators, this can be quite significant if it's a World Cup and teams are staying at 5-star hotels. Travel costs again of the teams and the officials. Professional advisors, like any other business, FIFA or World Rugby or Wimbledon will have accounting matters, tax matters, they'll have hundreds of legal contracts in place, and all of those need professional advisors to look through them to make sure that the organization is protected. Sometimes the organizers will pay a host fee to the host country for staging the event. Then there are allowances and living expenses which could be paid to the teams to meet their day-to-day expenses and for staff as well. The volunteer program, this is quite big. You could, closer to the event, have thousands of people who are helping the event as part of the volunteer program. So you have expenses relating to that. You may give them reimbursement of certain costs for their meals and so on, for their uniforms and so on. Obviously, an event, there'll be a lot of merchandise prepared. There'll be uniforms and gifts and giveaways for a whole host of people. The event branding, logo, and signage, very important. Every event has its own intellectual property rights, including their logos and their event branding, to make sure that that event is unique and distinct from other events. Advertising and marketing goes without saying that you want the event to be successful, so the advertising and marketing costs can be fairly significant. And then, of course, there are your normal office costs, rental, stationery, computers, etc., IT costs, which you'll incur like any other business. So those are some of the major expenses that underlie a sporting event. Now, if we look at the FIFA World Cup and we look at the P&L of the FIFA World Cup from FIFA's point of view, then in that case, you can see that FIFA raised $5.3 billion from that event. TV broadcast was 55%, almost $3 billion. Sponsorship revenues were 31%, $1.6 billion. Ticketing revenue, $540 million, and hospitality, $148 million, making up $5.3 billion in revenues. On the expense side, FIFA spent $1.8 million on the event, $1.1 million on the event operations, $400 million in prize money, $209 million under the club protection program, which I've explained in a separate video. And I mentioned the participation fee of $1.5 million to each participant. So as far as FIFA is concerned, they made $3.5 billion from the event. Now this excludes the numbers and the expenses for the host country, Russia, which is coming up on the next slide. So if we look at the P&L from the point of view of Russia, how much money did Russia make or spend on this event? So it's estimated that they spent between 11, 12, $15 billion on this event. And they spent that on 12 venues, $3 billion in upgrading their stadiums or building new stadiums, and $12 billion on infrastructure. And that included even the sewage systems, upgrading the sewage systems, building new housing, upgrading their power systems, building parks and green zones, upgrading their medical infrastructure and building new hospitals and hotels, improving their communications and railroads, airports. So Russia spent a huge amount of money in upgrading and building new infrastructure, which will stand Russia in excellent stead in the years to come. And this really is one of the legacies that some of these major events leave behind, because it forces, in a way, the host to improve their physical infrastructure, which benefits the country and the people in the years to come. So against this expense of 15 billion, how much did Russia actually make from the event? Well, no one knows. And the reason why is because there are a lot of, there's actually a boost to the economy as a whole. So temporary employment will have been created in Russia. Tourism would have taken a boost, and there would have been a lot of F&B sales. Hotels would have made money, taxis would have made money, restaurants would have made money, etc. during the event when thousands and thousands of people attended. then on top of this, there are unquantifiable benefits. So for example, Russia got huge political and social mileage from hosting the event. A lot of goodwill would have gone their way in hosting such a successful event. They would have also showcased their country during that time and in the lead up to the event. A lot of world leaders visited Russia to support their teams. That was also a political boost to Russia, and there's a lot of positive publicity generated for Russia and other host countries when they host such an event. So these things are unquantifiable, and at the end of the day, what's the net result? Well, in financial terms, we don't know the net result, but we do know that obviously a host country such as Russia thinks it's absolutely worth it to host such an event for the overall boost that it gives the economy and for the other benefits that I talked of, such as the positive image that it creates for the country. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you for my next episode. Bye for now.